State, a member of the House Intelligence Committee. U.S. Congressman David Cicilline of Rhode Island, he's on the House Judiciary Committee. Heidi Presley is an NBC News correspondent. And John Meacham, of course, is a presidential historian and co-author of Impeachment, an American History. Let me start with you, Congressman Heck. This having now a leader. I remember from reading about Nixon and writing about him all those years, he said, I knew I was in trouble when I saw who was running the show up there. In that case, my old boss, Tip O'Neill. Nancy Pelosi has been resistant to this campaign. It seems now she's out in front. What will that do?
Well, two strikes today, Chris. Actually, yes, he knows he's in trouble because of the Speaker's change of position, but he also ought to know he's in deep trouble because the Senate took action today to unanimously require and demand that the ODNI cough up the whistleblower complaint. That ought to tell him that we're now inching into bipartisan territory on his refusal to follow the law.
Did that strike you as significant? Did the Republicans join in that?
Absolutely. It says it's not any longer just a question of Democrats versus Republicans or even liberals and conservatives. This is a matter of upholding the law and following our Article I constitutional responsibility to provide oversight of an unchecked administration.
Congressman, if you could tell your people back at home in Rhode Island what to expect over the next couple of months, what would it be in terms of the action on the Hill right here in the House of Representatives over the next couple of months regarding the impeachment proceedings?
Well, I think there will be quick action by the Intelligence Committee on Thursday. They'll hear from the acting DNI. They expect that the DNI will produce the whistleblower report. If he doesn't, then they'll have to take additional action. But I think in very short order, we'll get to the bottom of this. But we should recognize the President of the United States has already admitted this. He admitted that he reached out to a foreign leader and asked him to basically gin up a fake story against a political opponent. That in and of itself is sufficient to warrant moving forward with articles.
Do you have a sense of both of you? I'm going to go to Heidi on this as a reporter. Heidi, it seems to me that for 3 years, the people trying to find out what happened when the president and Russia tried to connect the dots. A meeting at Donald Trump's hotel in June of 2016. They tried to connect the president's son with the president. They tried to connect Vissel Neskaya, some lawyer from Russia, with Putin. Here, it seems to be one big fat dot. It's a meeting between two presidents. Do you have a sense that this story requires a lot of reporting at this point, or even a lot of investigation at this point?
I think the congressman is right that Thursday will be another inflection point, because either we will see that whistleblower complaint or we will see how this Congress is going to use new tools to come down on this administration, or whether the obstruction itself becomes an article of impeachment. The members that I talked to said that this is a pretty clear-cut case and that Speaker Pelosi really did draw a distinction in that meeting, Chris, between the Russia situation where you had the president accepting dirt on a political opponent, and this situation where he was actually asking a foreign government to manufacture dirt on a political opponent, because as we've reported on this network and other networks, the Ukrainians have already disputed these charges. These are bogus charges. The case had been dormant for at least a year, and so in this case, he's admitting to it and asking this government to essentially manufacture something that doesn't exist, and withholding U.S. taxpayer dollars, which are meant to, guess what? Fight corruption. So leveraging taxpayer dollars then to benefit himself politically. And so in both her mind and in the mind of these national security-minded Democrats who frankly broke the dam last night, this did cross a new threshold.
John Meacham, sir, history here that's being made. We came to the Hill tonight because of it. You can feel it around here. Your thoughts?
You know, I was thinking about President Ford's inaugural address there in the East Room in August of '74, not to run too far ahead here, when he said, we're a government of laws and not of men. The Constitution works, the system works. And I think for so many people who've lost faith in the system of checks and balances, of Montesquieu through Madison to our own day, this is a day to say the system is showing signs of life. And it's far, 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 far from over. But ultimately, the checks and balances that have served us for 243 years have a chance now, again, of perhaps saving us from our worst instincts.
Well, as Congressman Heck just mentioned tonight, the U.S. Senate unanimously passed a Democratic resolution calling for the whistleblower's complaint to be turned over to Congress. Worse yet for Trump, he's actually admitted to the conduct that could bring about his impeachment, that he asked the president of Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his family. Now, for the first time in Trump's presidency, he's on the defensive, offering a concession that few presidents will willingly make. Trump's announced that he has authorized the release tomorrow of the complete, fully declassified and unredacted transcript of his phone conversation with President Zelensky of Ukraine. And also today, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said the whistleblower who set these events in motion now wants to break his or her silence. That person could testify as early as this week. Additionally, the Director of National Intelligence and the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee are set to testify before the Congress on Thursday. So here we are, and I guess the question is, if you have to tell your constituents, which you have to do as a representative, what do you say if the president goes down on this conduct, Mr. Haig?
Well, I would remind them about what the entire 2016 controversy was about, where, frankly, he encouraged, welcomed, and benefited from Russian interference, which is wrong. It's just plain wrong. And then, as Section 2 of the Mueller report so amply demonstrated, he obstructed justice in the pursuit of that investigation. And now he's doubling down. He's not chastened at all. Now he is encouraging foreign interference in our election in violation of the law, and he's obstructing justice in the form of denying the revelation of the whistleblower complaint. He's learned nothing. And Chris, understand that we don't come to this out of anger. We come to this with great sorrow. The fact is, if I may, I've got a marijuana banking bill that Mr. Perlmutter and I think is going to pass after 6.5 years of effort the day after tomorrow or tomorrow.
Right.
I want to be celebrating this week. I don't want to be doing this. He is compelling this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about that, because you raised the point, Congressman. The day after Mueller gave his testimony up here, and he wasn't at his best that day. We all know that. It wasn't that great television drama. But the message was pretty clear. Don't collude with Russians. The next day, he colluded with the Ukrainian president.
Yeah.
He was saying, screw
right.
you.
I think what's really important here, and the way I explain to my constituents, is the conduct of the president is endangering the national security of the United States. He is trying to trade our support for an ally, support approved by Congress, and in order to elicit from the president of Ukraine a political benefit from himself. And he's violating law. He told the DNI not to release the whistleblower report, even though that's required by statute. So we have in plain view, in real time, the president of the United States seeking assistance from a foreign leader and breaking the law and trying to keep it secret. And as Denny said, we don't do this with delight, but we have a responsibility to stand up to defend the Constitution and the rule of law and defend against a president who's betraying his oath of office.
That's the moral question, the historic question, Heidi, because I grew up with the captive nations of Eastern Europe in countries like Ukraine, where I went to school with a lot of Ukrainians. And boy, the idea that a president would stake their freedom from Russia based upon whether he got dirt from the president is unimaginable. It'd be like Ike talking to the Hungarians, if you give me some dirt, I'll protect you from the Russians. I mean, it's unimaginable historically. Your thoughts?
Well, wouldn't it be ironic, Chris, if the Russians tried to help get this president into office and a scandal over Ukraine helped to bring him down? We're not there yet. But yes, we've seen many unimaginable moments here, but I think that the congressmen really put their finger on it when they said that he has been emboldened every step of the way here, because there has not been a single incidence, really, here of the oversight, and with all due respect to members of Congress and the House, where they've succeeded in getting a major document or witness other than Mueller to come up there and give them information. And even that wound up being, in the eyes of many, kind of a disappointment, because he wouldn't go much beyond what was in his report. And even then, it was kind of a stilted delivery. And so, next week, I think by this time next week, we will have a very good answer, assuming that the DNI does come through with this whistleblower complaint. The extent to which the president, and now the reporting is 8 times, pressured the Ukrainians to collect dirt, we'll have a good sense of whether or not that all is true.
That was the Wall Street Journal report. 8 times President Trump brought up his demand for dirt on Joe Biden with the president of Ukraine. It's an amazing bit of news. Anyway, Politico is also now reporting that the White House is now preparing to release the whistleblower's complaint itself. and the Inspector General's report by the end of the week. So, Congressman, these guys, the president, for the first time in his presidency, looks like he's reacting rather than acting.
Well, I think he feels the heat, and he should, because he's willfully violated the law, and his administration has. I'm looking forward a great deal to hearing from the ODNI and seeing the whistleblower complaint. And let us remember that the independent Inspector General has deemed the underlying considerations from the complainant to be of an urgent nature and backed by credible evidence. Let's remember that. And the definition of the law is a flagrant abuse or violation of the law.
Well, somebody, this whistleblower, man or woman, obviously civil servant, in the national security
appointed by President Trump.
Well, the whistleblower.
No, I'm talking about the
but the whistleblower, the person, the real bit who triggered this,
Right.
watched the pattern of the president's behavior, and something in it said to him, "This is urgent. This can't be done."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the action by the Senate today has really helped. This is the first time we're seeing our Senate colleagues join us in this effort to hold this president accountable and demonstrate no one is above the law. The president's required to follow the law, and that action today, I think, has done a lot to help advance this forward.
John Meacham, you're going to get the last word, I think, in this segment, and I'm glad you're on tonight. We've had Andrew Johnson impeached, saved in the Senate, a close one-vote difference. We have Bill Clinton impeached. That didn't go anywhere in the Senate base, so that was a partisan issue in many ways. Nixon was forced to resign after the House Judiciary Committee acted. Here we are back again, somewhere in that vicinity. Your thoughts about how this fits in history?
Well, all three of those impeachments unfolded at a time when there was a deep fracturing of the country and a fundamental, almost existential question confronting us. It was the nature of the Union after the Civil War and whether the verdict of the war would actually be implemented. Johnson stood in the way of that. He tried to undo the work of Lincoln in many ways. President Nixon was impeached at a time of both Cold War and cultural upheaval. The Clinton impeachment unfolds at a moment of generational shift from the World War II generation to the baby boomers, and a continuation of the shifting nature of the parties after segregation and integration. And now we have this question of, are we in fact going to have a coherent answer to globalization and the questions that confront us? In 2016, we had a populist spasm, and what we're going to see right now is whether the people who have supported this president for other reasons will in fact follow the facts to their logical conclusion. This is a great test for the relevance and role of fact and truth in our politics in the 21st century.
And of course, the strength of our Constitution in this 21st century. Does it still matter what the limits of power are? Anyway, thank you, U.S. Congressman Danny Heck of Washington State, David Cicilline of Rhode Island, Heidi Presslett, thank you with us, and John Meacham with History. Coming up, much more on tonight's breaking news. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as I said, announces a formal impeachment inquiry, a proceeding really heading towards an up or down vote at some point on President Trump's impeachment. And that is the floodgates open today with 36 House members announcing just today their support for beginning the impeachment process.